So, welcome back, everybody. We are continuing in the second chapter of Shar Yichud Ve'emunah, which we recently began. We're holding on page 154, pretty much in the middle of the page. Ve'hein hein, the line ends Ve'hein hein. You can see it in the corresponding English text as well. We did mention Shar Yichud Ve'emunah being a very unique segment, comprised of 12 chapters, called the gateway into the oneness, naturally, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ve'emunah and the faith. We spoke in the very beginning when we opened up this, when we started this segment, after concluding, making the Siyum of L'Pikei Amorim, that it is a shar, literally a gateway that a person could really enter, totally enter, and kind of become part of that spirit of the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not only saying it, the Shema Yisrael, proclaiming it and so on, but really living it in the most literal sense. And we began the second chapter last week. You can see this second chapter in the first chapter in all the previous classes, as we mentioned time and again, namely for the newcomers on the original site. You might see it on other sites as well, but on the original site it would be on another site as well, rather, but the original site is the tanyaonline.com, one word, Tanya Online. The advantage that you could follow the text on a separate scroll bar independent of the class, and so to access to all the previous classes, which come up in the same fashion. So we're holding Ve'hein hein b'chinas esis hadibur me'asar ma'amaris. These are the 10 sayings. These are the letters of speech from the 10 sayings shebahen nivru, from which they were created. So again, we don't need to elaborate on the previous class. It's literally a click away. But the message of the Alter Rebbe, the overall up till now, is that based on this, what it says in Medrash Tilim, based on the pasuk, the Baal Shem Tov Nefarish disseminates and explains this, that la'olam Hashem dvarecha b'nitza b'shamayim, that forever Hashem, your words stand in heaven, meaning to say that when Hashem created heaven, let's say Yehira Kiyah, for that matter, it applies to every part of creation, which, as we know, Hashem spoke creation into being. The world was created with the 10 sayings. So, for example, Hashem said, Yehira Kiyah, shall there be the firmaments? So that's when the firmaments came around. That's when heaven came around. So la'olam, it wasn't a one-time creation, but it's la'olam, forever. On a constant basis, your dvarcha, your words, through which you created heaven, is nitza b'shamayim, stands within heaven. And the only reason why heaven exists is because Hashem's words are right now infused into heaven, and that's why they exist. And so too, not only heaven, but every part of creation, every olam for that matter, Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, we mentioned many times, but namely, the Asiya Hagashmis. We know there's Asiya Ruchnis. It's the counterpart of the physical Olam. There's the spiritual Asiya, but again, what we're more familiar with, is the Olam Asiya Hagashmis, this physical world. So everything that you see in this physical world, even a stone, like the Alter Rebbe speaks in the first chapter, notes in the first chapter of this Shar Yichud Ve'emunah segment, that the stone, when you look at a stone, it just is because it was once created thousands of years ago, so it just exists and is there. It's not so at all. The reason why it exists now, because Hashem is repumping, revitalizing creation in general, and that stone itself, this energy which created the stone in the very beginning of creation, when there was a state that the stone was not, and it came into a yes being, an is being, is because Hashem created it from something to nothing, the ex nihilo idea, phenomenon, that it was from nothing to something. So that energy which created the stone then is creating the stone in its totality right now. And then if Hashem would pull back on that energy, the stone would literally disappear, turn to a state of nothingness the way it was prior to creation. And so to everything within creation. So the reason why the stone is not because it was there by the 6th day of creation, not even because it was there a moment ago. And one would say, what changed? It's there because it was there a moment ago. No, it's because Hashem is recreating the stone right now. And how is He recreating? The same way He created the stone in the very beginning. He said, and it wasn't, there's no words in the Torah, Yehi Evan, like there's Yehi Rakia, but again, you could look in the first chapter, in which again, there's different ways the Asar Mamoris come to fruition. There's sometimes the Asar Mamoris itself, or the way they come down through Gimatriyas, through the whole phenomenon of numerology, which is based in Teda, as we know, which again, the whole idea of the numeric value of something, it's the same idea, but it comes through the, so to say, it comes through the curtain or the veil of the same numeric value. Obviously, there's a minimization of the energies, like we explained. You see the word Baruch, you understand right away it's blessed, or like we said, someone's name is Baruch, he sees his name, and then you have something, and you say, no, this is connected to the same word Baruch, figure it out, and you realize it's the same numeric value, so it's the same, carries one way or another a similar message, but now it's a second generation, if you will. So it's a minimization of the message, in this context, a minimization of the energy. And again, as you'd see in Perek Aleph, no need to elaborate, it's a click away to see this, which Hashem, again, not everything what we see in front of our eyes do we find the words, the exact word of it in Torah. You don't see He Evan, and you don't see many of the millions and billions of part of our creations in our creation sourced directly in Torah, but in the end of the day, it all comes from those Sar Mamorim, from those 10 sayings. Or it's combination, or it's interchanging letters, again, as you can see in Perek Aleph. So that same energy which created the stone is creating right now this stone. And the whole reason why it's there is because Hashem is giving it this chayas. So and the Alter Rebbe brings this metaphor from Kriyas Yamsuf, that Hashem blew the wind in order the water should stand up like a wall. And as the Alter Rebbe points out, there is even only changing two natures. It's two created beings. For example, you have a wall, a stone wall, which has its nature is to stand in upright position. Water happens to be that the nature of water, not the mere existence of water, but the nature of water is to flow. So it's a kind of detail, it's a dynamic within the creation of water, but that to change the nature, that very nature, that dynamic within the creation of water to another nature, to stand up like a wall, the Torah testifies that it was because Hashem blew that wind through the entire night, and it pushed the water to an upright position for Am Yisrael to be able to get by. And if Hashem, the wind would have been less potent, meaning to say wouldn't have blown in that direction, and it wouldn't be that ruach azo, in other words, that intense wind, the water would not stand up. Hashem could do anything, but that's the way Hashem did it, and testified of this very miracle in the Teiras Emes, the way he performed Kriyas Yamsuf, and so if that wouldn't have been the exact dosage, so to say, of that wind, the water would have reverted to its original nature, which water flows. So changing two natures, you have to have that wind pumping on the water in order to bring it upward like a wall. How much more so you want to bring something from a state of total nothingness, not only a reformation of a nature, a change of a modification of a nature, but you want to bring something in which did not exist to a state of existence. How much more so there has to be the kayach, which is mahava, machayim, mekayim, on a constant basis. So it's not enough it was created in the 6 days of creation. It's not enough it was created a moment ago. Hashem has to recreate, because if not, again, it would revert to nothing, is no thing at all, as we learned and explained. And again, a click away. One other thing we pointed out, which is in the last chapter or two, about something with in the end of the day, the whole phenomenon of creation is opposite that Hashem's infinite being. Hashem is echad. Hashem, there's the pshitas of the lukus, the true oneness, infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which in the end of the day is creating the finite, a world of hell and v'hester. As the Gemara says, this is the mere makeup of Olam. Olam is milashon hell and v'hester, which conceals and covers up of the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the whole phenomenon of the finite, the phenomenon of finitude in the face of the infinite Creator is one big chidush, one big great novelty. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to do that, so to say, express himself in an opposite spirit, obviously Hashem has to recreate on a constant basis. We gave the example of a ball. When it flies upwards, it flies indefinitely. Again, you can see it in the previous chapter. The reason why it's going in its opposite direction is everything, including the ball, gravitates downwards. is because you infuse a certain energy in the ball, and that's the reason why it's doing opposite than its very nature. And you see it's only because of the energy you infused in that ball, because after a while you will see that it'll dissipate and it'll slow down and it'll completely diffuse. Let's say the ball would be diffused from that energy, you'll see it just go straight back to its original nature, which is to gravitate downwards. So it's your energy which is invested in that ball to do opposite than its nature. Hashem creating a world which you can say again, it's so the opposite spirit and the opposite of the nature of who Hashem is, Hashem Echad, of the infinity, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem has to constantly recreate. Again, this is additional to what the Alter Rebbe says, and brings this metaphor from Kriyas Yamsuf, changing two natures. There was that wind which had to blow on the water in order to stand up kineidu kechayma, like an upright position. How much more so to create something from nothing, the yesh me'ayin, something coming to exist from a state of total nothingness. That's the way it was before Hashem created the world. And in order for that to happen, Hashem has to constantly create. And the created force and energy, the hein, what we're holding, is these are the letters of this speech of Asar Mamoris, of the same 10 sayings, for which Hashem used to create the world. Hashem created the world by Asar Mamoris, from these 10 sayings. So when you see that stone, which at a time when Hashem did, by the 6 days of creation, it did not exist, and Hashem created the stone with a certain energy or a formula of energy from the Asar Mamoris, again, as noting of this detail which we spoke about just in this class. In other words, just earlier, and namely emphasized in Perek Aleph. So that same energy, with that same formula, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is right now creating the stone with the same Asar Mamoris, and in the same fashion. And Hashem pulls back on that energy, the stone returns to nothing. And therefore, when you see the stone, is because Hashem is creating the stone. And a moment later, Hashem is again creating the stone. Remember once the Rebbe said, I believe it was Simchas Torah Fabrengen, the context of Yidden saying L'chaim to each other. The Rebbe said, in essence, Hashem is saying L'chaim to his world on a constant basis. L'chaim and L'chaim and L'chaim. And Hashem, if you see the world continues, even another moment, Hashem is saying L'chaim to that world in general, and into that created being, and this created being, and this creation, and that creation. Hashem is saying L'chaim, because if Hashem does not say L'chaim to that stone does not it ceases to exist totally, as we explained and elaborated in the previous chapter and in the previous class. So this is Al-Zen Nemar Va'at Mechayes Kulam, and this it says, the pasuk says, you Mechayes Kulam, you vitalize everything. And not something of the past that you created everything, but you continue to be Mechayeh, you continue to vitalize Kulam, everything. Whatever you see in front of your eyes, Hashem is being Mechayeh, Hashem is giving it new life, new existence, and revivifying every single thing on a constant basis. And we say more so, I'll take Mechayeh, El Mehave. Don't read Mechayeh, but Mehave, which the difference is obvious. First of all, when we say Al Tikri, it's not like completely removing the previous word. The pasuk says Mechayeh, but like in all the Al Tikri, the Gemara brings, don't read this, because the Gemara is trying to introduce a new message or to emphasize the message of the very pasuk, of that very word, or to channel it. What's the pasuk really mean? In this case, also Al Tikri Mechayeh El Mehave. It's not only something is there, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, again, giving energy to this which already pre-exists, but Mehave, he is recreating. Ata, like it would say, Mehave es kulam. Because if Hashem does not recreate, it turns back, reverts exactly to the way it was before the 6 days of creation, and then Hayahu Shmei Bavad, there was no world at all. And if you focus on this example, which we're constantly giving the stone, there was no stone. We all can appreciate before Hashem created the stone. The first time there was no phenomenon of a stone. Then Hashem creates the stone. So Hashem is right now creating the stone from a state of nothing to a state of something in an ex nihilo manner, which is the ex nihilo phenomenon, from nothing to something, and that's happening every moment. V'ata mehave es kulam. And the Ainu Yesh Mi'ayin, again, a state from something, from nothing. And Ve'ato, if you back to the pasuk Ve'ato, look, it comes across so beautiful. Ve'ato is Mehaves Kulam. What do you have in Ve'ato? Aleph to Tov. These are the 22 letters through which Hashem created every creation, including our creation, Elam Asiyah, with these Chavbeis Eisiyas, with the combination. And the configurations, the way it's described in presented in the Asar Mamoris, which is again part of Torah, as we learned in the end of Perek Aleph. Torah carries the infinite energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so this becomes part of Torah, and that gives the kayach, the energy of the force, the power of the Asar Mamoris to create. So it's the Ato, it's the Aleph to Tov, that is what create. What happened to the Hey? Where does the Hey come in? But the Hey is not extra over here, because the Hey is part of the same message. The Hey, the five extractions of the mouth, literally translated, but it means we know that all letters, the pronunciation of letters, come from the five areas of the mouth, which are, call it, let's say, the five instruments, if you will, which you have the throat, the tongue, the gums, the teeth, the lips. If you look at every single letter, you look at a lamed, you're using your tongue, a chaf, your throat. There's the five areas through which there is the pronunciation of all letters. So this is also the vi'ato, when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's the aleph atov, and then the hey meitzah through which Hashem creates all of creation. Hey meitzah makir isis, which are the source of the letters. Now one is going to say, really? Okay, ato, 24 isis, I could appreciate, but hey meitzah, do we think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he has the five instruments like the human being? Hashem doesn't have any of that. Hashem, there's no image of body by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not so Dal Rebbe right away ask, Hashem doesn't have the image of a body, but Mikr Mali Berakosuf. Nonetheless, we see the Pasuk does use those terms in association with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Open the Chumash, Vayidaber Hashem, Vayemer Hashem. How many times is it saying the Torah, Vayidaber Hashem? Hashem spoke. Vayemer Hashem, Hashem said. Since when did Hashem speak or say? That is something, a terminology which is usually applied to the human being. That talks, the human being says, the human being relates. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you could say he related. What does it mean he spoke? Even Hashem had to give over a message to Moshe Rabbeinu, to give over to Am Yisrael. Why would the Torah use the word Vayidaber Hashem? Hashem doesn't speak. Hashem relates, gives a message into the heart and mind of Moshe Rabbeinu, again with maximum accuracy. He's Moshe Rabbeinu to give over the word of Hashem with the ultimate precision to Am Yisrael, if it's in the context of Torah or any other message that Hashem gave over and gives over to Moshe Rabbeinu. So why would the Torah use the word Vayidaber? Answer, because that's the way the Pasuk wants to ascribe Hashem relating something to the Navi, to give over to Am Yisrael. And he uses the terminology Vayidaber, Vayemer to tell us that metaphorically speaking it exists on high as well. For that matter, the reason why we have the ability to talk, and we have the ability to express those 22 Isiyas, and in the human condition it's via the Hey Meitzah Sapeh, these five instruments, if you will, is because it somewhat exists on high. Does it exist physically on high? Obviously not. Hashem doesn't have a Dmus HaGuf, but Hashem himself, when he wants to, the Torah itself wants to express Hashem relating to something, to somebody, or to creation for that matter, it's Vayidaber Hashem and Vayemer Hashem. And I say to creation because these are Asar Mamoris. Why would Hashem say Vayemer Lekimihi Eir? Why the Torah describe Hashem's creating in a way of Vayemer, he said? Speaking is attributed to the human being. Not so much apparently not to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which doesn't have the image of the body. But nonetheless, the Eibush just decided to express his relating or creating, for that matter, in the very beginning of creation, Vayemer Hashem Yehi Or, Vayemer Hashem Yehi Rakia, to tell us that yes, metaphorically exists on high. So when the Torah says, the pasuk says Va'ato Mechayis Kulam, the pasuk is referring to the way it exists on high. Obviously not in a physical sense, but in conceptually it exists on high because the Eibishter himself writes in the Torah the terminology Vayidaber Hashem and Vayemer Hashem. So it is justifiable when the pasuk used Va'ato Mechayis Kulam to demonstrate that the 22 Asiyas is this which is Mechayah, gives life to everything, in that with the expression of Va'ato, the 22 letters from Aleph to Tov, and yes, the Hey Meitzah Sapeh even though we could appreciate it namely when it comes to the human being, but nonetheless, because Hashem uses the Torah itself, Hashem himself uses his own expression and his own relating with the terminology of Vaydaber Hashem Vayemer Hashem. So yes, we could say metaphorically, conceptually speaking, there's the Hey Meitzasapeh Kaviyachal by HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. And that is Mechayas Kulam. And that is not only Mechayas Kulam, but Mahava, that brings everything to existence on a constant basis. Now when it comes to Hashem speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu, for that matter, it's the same 22 letters to which Hashem created the world. Which the Alter Rebbe is basically going to say over here is, interesting that you see Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Leimer, and he said Vayemer Hashem el Moshe Leimer, as an example, Vayemer Hashem el Moshe as an example. And interestingly and ironically, we have the same exact term when Hashem created this world, obviously all of creation, including this world, which Ein Mikra Yetzer Midei Pshutei, when you learn the beginning of Parsha Bereshis, as Hashem is speaking about creating Elam Hazeh, we see ironically Hashem uses this physical world, we see ironically Hashem uses the same term, Vayemer Hashem. So apparently here, Vayemer Hashem Yehi Or Vayemer Hashem Yehi Raki, there should be the firmaments. And then Vayemer Hashem LaMoshe, doesn't it seem like this what Hashem related to Moshe is at a much deeper level, a profound concept, something which is going to become part of Tedas Emes, not only of a mere physical firmament, or waters, mayim, or and so on, everything associated with creation, which by definition is way inferior than the inner message of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way it's related and associated with Tedas Emes, our holy Torah. And we spoke many times that there's a Asara Mamoris and Asara Sadibris. This is the inferior expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which created a world which by definition is an inferior world, as opposed to by Asara Sadibris, which is the inner workings of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not just Hashem speaking, but this is the inner talk of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the inner energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which that is Torah. Torah is a Lukus. Torah is the godly word. And there's no comparison between Aseret Sadibris and Aseret Mamoris. As again, we spoke about this quite a few times in Likutei Amarim, which you can find in those chapters, which speak about the difference between Aseret Mamoris and Aseret Sadibris, not directly in Likutei Amarim, but these concepts which, when he speaks about L'Shem Yichud Kutsha B'richu Shchinte, because again, in the end of the day, Hashem wants us to fuse the two. The Aseret, as famously said in Asara Akaf B'Shekel HaKodesh, Hashem wants the Aseret Sadibris to be infused, the Aseret Mamoris to connect with Aseret Sadibris. Ultimately, the message of Aseret Sadibris to imbue the Aseret Mamoris, and the whole world becomes a holy world, elevated, sublimated through the Aseret Sadibris, through the energy of Torah, which is the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the inner workings of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the extent Torah, Hu v'chochmasi echad, Danechi Hashem Alekecha, the Torah being HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, B'chvei Atzmin. Hashem wants, there should not be the dissonance between the two. Hashem wants the fusion of the two, and that's the purpose of the Yid coming into this world. Yichud Kutshubrichu Shchinte, that these two energies should combine, meaning to say the world, when you look at a world, we should be able to see a world which is guided with the guidance of Torah, a world which appreciates the message of Torah, a world which is led, and a world which is ultimately saturated with the message of Torah, ultimately the message of the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like we say, Ba'imahu Yiyeh, Mashiach will come, we say Hashem Echad U'Shmei Echad, V'Hashem Melech HaKol Ha'oretz, the very land, the physicality becomes again fused with the message of Achdus Hashem. It proclaims the Achdus Hashem because again there was the combination of the two. That's the ultimate objective, but by definition, there's a set of sadibris, which is the inwardness, if you will, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as opposed to Vayemer Hashem Yirakia, created a world which is inferior. Lashon and Zayar, Lav Urche de Malka Lishtoi b'Milad Yeta. This is called Milad Yeta, inferior, simple words in comparison to the energy of Torah. So why would HaKadosh Baruch Hu use the same terminology, Vayidaber Hashem, Vayemer Hashem, L'Moshe, which is relating to the messages of Torah, to Vayemer Hashem, which is associated with mere creation? So the answer, the Alter Rebbe is saying, yes, this is in different levels. In the end of the day, Hashem relates to Moshe, and Hashem relates his messages to Moshe. If it's the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, it's the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. Or for that matter, the prophecy of any prophet or prophetess. It's all coming, and it's all part of the revelation, the manifestation of these 22 Asias. Because just like when it comes to man, no one knows what's going on with the inside of the person, if it's the way he feels, he or she feels, their intellect, or even their thoughts. I say even because we learned so many times thought is also a levush, not to go into it now. It's a garment over the nefesh. But the only way you know what's going on within me is when I relate it to you. I talk to you about my thoughts, I talk to you about my feelings and my understandings, and that's the only way you can appreciate where I'm holding what I want to, what my message is. Personally or in association with community or whatever it is, depends who's talking. Speech is always a conduit through which the inwardness and the inner workings of the human being, let's say, comes to a state that the other party could appreciate and deal with and work with. So to Hashem, lahavdel elef havdelis, his inner workings come out also through speech. Just like it exists, lahavdel elef havdelis, by the human being. But nonetheless, you can, and so when we speak about the prophecy, or we speak about the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Moshe Rabbeinu, eventually these are the message which become part of Teiras Emes, it's the same terminology, Vayemer is used, Vayidaber is used. And the same Vayemer Elikim, when Hashem creates an Eilam, which again is inferior in comparison, Be'ein Arech, to the energy of the Aseres Hadibris, or every part of Torah, Hashem uses the same Vayemer, because in the end of the day, as Hashem expressing what is going on inside, how He wants His inner energy to come to fruition and to come to actualization and to realization, may be the creation of the world, or if He wants to relate to Moshe Rabbeinu, a particular prophecy rather, or a message which will become part of Teiras Emes. But can you compare the two? Obviously you cannot compare the two. This is for example, a simple example. Let's say a king wants to implement a new idea, an edict, because he feels that's going to perfect his entire country. So he gets out there and his ministers are standing on his side, and he calculates his words, and every word is sharp and clear and carries, especially those who appreciate or understand the king, his personality, his depth. And he stands and he comes out for 50 seconds and he says what he says as an example, and eventually that edict is carried throughout his entire country, and in that little shtetl, in the end of the country, they take that energy and eventually they deal with it and they try to implement. So the governing of the personality, so to say, of that little town or municipality, they also talk with each other how to implement that, if it's about the lighting, if it's about the energy, and whatever the king had in mind to establish and bring about in his own country. They're talking about the same message, but could you compare the clarity, the sharpness, or namely the energy of that message coming from the king to the way it goes through channel by channel by channel by channel, or say person to person, and eventually leading to that individual who is trying to implement that edict in the end, a little town towards the end of the country, which we can understand it's not only geographically distant, but it goes through so many layers till it comes to that individual which is trying to implement that very spirit or that very message, which was the edict of the king back when he came out for those 50 seconds and said that statement. And they're talking about how to connect this and how to do that in order to ultimately implement it for the better benefit of the people, this was the message, this is what the king had in mind in the onset when he spoke, when he came out with this. In the end of the day, he had in mind that this would bring comfort and ease to all his people in every part of his country. But you compare the sharpness, the clarity, the acuteness of the message, the way it is when it comes out of the king, of the mouth of the king, to the way it eventually evolves through the entire chain of command, better said, through the entire chain of command till it gets to that little town. Can't compare, even though it's also carrying somewhat of that same message. So when similar, and when the king is speaking, those ministers who pick up on the message of the king, it's a different type of message, if you will. In other words, it's what they appreciate from that brief message of the king. They appreciate the inner energy of those words. They associate it with the depth of the king. They associate it with the personality of the king, the greatness of the king. They feel the melech. They feel the king, and when they listen to and appreciate and absorb that message we came across in that moment, because that really represents the inner workings of the king, as opposed to when it evolves level after level through the entire chain of command till it's implemented in the little city, in the little town, in the end of the king's of the end of the country, as an example. So we're just giving you a quick example that in the end of the day, Hashem uses Vaydaber Hashem Vayim Hashem, because that's the way Hashem relates from his inner workings to the outer, meaning to say the way Hashem wants the message, if it's a prophecy or part of Teiras Emes, to ultimately come to actualization, to realization. And then the same terminology Hashem uses when Hashem creates all beings, even though creation is infinitely inferior to the superiority of Torah, or the superiority of Nevuah, of prophecy. But in the end of the day, it's the same Chabez Asius, it's the same 22 letters. Let's see it inside. Again, this example is not accurate, but nonetheless it gives the spirit of this message. It indeed gives the spirit of this message. He says, Vaydaber Hashem Vayim Hashem, it's the same as Galus Chabez Asius Elyanim L'Nevim, to the prophets. Umislapshes B'sichlam, and this energy vests in their intellect, Vasagosam, in their perception, B'mara and Nevuah, in their seeing and their vision of prophecy, which naturally there's clarity, and that's why the Navi is a Navi. Obviously we're talking about sensory vision, but nonetheless there's clarity and transparency in that sensory vision. And become a machshavtam v'diburim, also in their thoughts, v'diburam, and in their speech, the way the Navi uses his speech to relate the message that he just received from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to his people, that his speech carries the message of this what he saw, and this which was related to him. Like it said, the spirit of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says the Navi, that the spirit of HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to me, and his words, Hashem's words, al l'sheni, is on my tongue. That what Hashem relates is on the tongue of the Navi. So this not only becomes part of his seichel, not only becomes part of his, which is his intellect, not only becomes part of his perception, but not only becomes part of his thoughts, but that becomes what Hashem relates, becomes part of the Navi's speech. Umila say, Hashem's words, al l'sheni, is on my tongue. Like the Arizal writes in the gateway of Nevuah, which is again one of this with Arizal comprised. And just like when it comes to the Navi, Hashem saying Vayemen Hashem to the Navi, or the pasuk saying Vayemen Hashem to the Navi, starting from Moshe Rabbeinu, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Leimer, which again it's the same revelation of the energy, which is these 22 Aces, the 22 letters. Okay, similarly, the same idea is Hashem's letters invested in creations. Like it said, additional to what we mentioned time and again, there's the Asorim Amoris Nivra Elam. Hashem says Vayemer and Vayemer 10 times in Bereshis, even though the exact counting, it's 9 times, like we said, but the Gemara says Bereshis Namim Maimeru. And so too, it's a clear pasuk. Bidvar Hashem Shamayim Nasu, that heavens were created with the dibur of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Uvuruach Piv Kol Tzvav, in the spirit of Hashem's mouth, the entire army of Hashem, which is again the sun, the moon, and all parts of creation, is coming from the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Asarim Amoris, as again we explained even in these 2 chapters, of Ruach Piv Hashem, the spirit of Hashem's mouth, metaphorically speaking, naturally, Kol Tzavav, Hashem's entire army. The only thing is, no one's going to compare and say, or as we spoke then, when we spoke about the L'Shem Yichud Kutchubrichu Shchintis, no one's going to say, what do I have to learn Torah or be part of the spirit of Torah? And if I sit down by a table and I play chess, obviously we're not talking about doing something bad, contrary to Hashem's desire, but something neutral. I'm not connected with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem did not create the table, and we just learned that not only Hashem created so to say, the phenomenon of wood. If I see a table, because Hashem is right now creating the table. Hashem is right now infusing his energy in the table. So isn't the table associated with elokus, with godliness? Or anything that I'm doing? If the game I'm playing, Hashem is right now creating it. As we just learned, if Hashem just stops creating this table, the table ceases to exist. That demonstrates so much of the connection of the table with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not only the connection, the whole table is about the Achdus Hashem, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So why do I have to take a Gemara and sit and learn Torah? And say the Torah is Dvar Hashem, the Torah is the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Dvar Hashem is in the table as well. And we answered that it's not so. Because again, this is coming from a inferior dimension within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As we gave the example then, this great professor comes to put down an important, or to relate an important presentation, and thousands of people show up, and he comes in, he takes up his coat, and he asks his accomplice, could you hang up my coat? And then he starts with his presentation. So when someone wants to repeat that, for example, and try to quote or try to identify with the important words or the profound words of the professor, will he ever start with the words, could you hang up my coat? Obviously not. That's not the part of who he is. Or we gave the example when he comes from his, he walks in and he steps over a few pebbles and he makes this difference of what is going on under those pebbles, for example. In the ant kingdom, which he does, because whenever you walk on stones, there's something going on right under that very stone. Is there something that we dignify, or there's something about that we associated with the greatness of the professor? Absolutely not. It's in his presentation, in his thesis, what he presents, that is demonstrable of who he is and what he represents, his breadth, his depth, his deep understanding in matters, or in that matter that he's relating. That's who he is. And so too, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, that's milin dehedieta. It's inferior words in comparison to who Hashem really is, the famous expression of the famous Mekubal, Loida HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is, it would be called a Bayrei. It's the greatest Yerida, descend, the degradation. It's a Yerida to descend within HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to even be called a Bayrei, to be called a creator. For creation is an extremely extraordinary, inferior expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's like hang up my coat. That's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. The real is of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Anochi Hashem Aleikecha. Like the Gemara says, Anochi itself is the acronym Ano Nafshi Ksavis Yehavis. I put my whole nefesh and I wrote it into Torah and I gave it into Torah and I gave the Torah over to you. That's where I am. I am in Torah. That's where I am. That's my presentation. Because Olam is, the world, especially Olam Agashmi, devoid of the message of Elkus. Obviously, the purpose of the Yid is l'shem yichud kutsha b'richu, to bring together that level of kutsha b'richu, the Kodesh of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way that Hashem has formed us by Himself, transcendent dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is again lies in Torah with the Shechinte, with this which is Shechenes Mislabesh, as the lower inferior dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates, which that's the Asara Mamores of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The point is to fuse them together. Asara Kaf B'Shechel HaKadosh, I believe we mentioned earlier, the idea of the fusion of the two. The Yid takes the world and he elevates the world, refines the world, sublimates the world. The world should be a keli, a container to the message of Torah. And ultimately a world, as we mentioned in the past demonstrating the Hashem Echad, Ushmei Echad, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on all levels. V'haya Hashem Melcha Kol Ha'aretz, the very Aretz demonstrates the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the whole point why Hashem sends the Neshama down to this world to fuse the two. But if you want to categorize categorize both of them individually, this is part of the inner workings of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this is the most inferior expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the way to connect it to Hashem is precisely, yes, through opening a Gemara and learning Torah. Perhaps you do it on the table, so the table itself is right now is being sublimated to the spirit of Torah. You're elevating the table for sure, as opposed to doing narishkeit on the table, for example. Not even sin, but things which are not connected to the inner workings of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But when you talk about the creation of the table, or the creation of Olam, it's also coming from Vayemer Hashem expressing Himself, which this is the point of speech, that a person expresses what goes on in a human being. Lahavdel of Havdel is expressive, what goes on inward. what's going on inside. In other words, to the outside, that anybody else could relate. So Hashem uses that same terminology, Vayemer Hashem. But could you compare the Vayemer Hashem of Torah, Vayemer Hashem, Vayidaber Hashem, El Moshe Leimer Hashem, expressing the message of Torah, or the Milosei Al Hasheni, Hashem's words in the tongue of the Navi, the message Hashem wants to relate and convey to the Navi, to give over to the people? That's the true inner workings of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as opposed to the Asora Mamores, as the Alter Rebbe says, of Yerishtal Shlus Rabbis Vatzumis, kind of similar to the example which we gave before, the way the townspeople talk about that message, because it's coming through many levels which conceal and somewhat even taint that very message of the king. Again, not in a negative way, but it inevitably, as it goes through step by step, level by level, you can't compare the energy and the speech of the way the townspeople are dealing with the way it comes out of the words of the king in its original state, even though there itself the king is coming from his inner chamber, from his own palace, from himself, the way he's for himself, by himself, and is relating to his people, is relaying a message to his people. So he's also coming out from himself and dealing with the outside, with ultimately for the benefit of his entire country, including that little town. But you can't compare the words which come out in the initial state of the words coming out of the king, and the way the ministers appreciate the depth of those words, to the townspeople which take the message and talk about it and deal with it in order to implement it. And the same thing, similar idea, Ishtalshulus, Rabbis Vatzumis, it goes through the chain of Seder Ishtalshulus, as we spoke about this many times, with just many contractions, many levels, till it comes to this physical world and ultimately creates every part of creation, including that stone. As opposed to the perception of an Nevi'im, that's the energy of Atzilus, which invests in Elam Abriya. Because again, Atzilus, that's where the Kayach, the original, so to say, the transition between Hashem, the way He's for Himself, by Himself, and coming into Malchus, which becomes Malchus Kol Elamim, which is Hashem opening up to something lower, starting from the creation of Elam Habriya. We spoke many times, Elam Habriya is a world, but nonetheless, there's no comparison, and it's a very spiritual world. It says the Ganein Ha'elyain is in Briya. Everything in Briya obviously is about Elokus, but there's no comparison to Elam Habriya, to Elam Atzilus. Atzilus is a world which houses the Ein Sof, the way the Ein Sof is, so to say. Atzilus is the way that Hashem has formed himself by himself, and Mabriya begins the whole new phenomenon. So even though of, so to say, creation, we spoke about this many times, we're not going to repeat it over here, and therefore it's always complimental as Atzilus, and then Briya Tzir Asiya, till Asiya Gashmis, because there is that change from the way everything is, the Layagur Charatz. There's not even a subtle, anything even is subtly expressing anything else other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the world of Atzilus. Le'yigur Chara doesn't mean evil, but again, even the slightest source of Yeshus doesn't exist in Atzilus. The real transition is from Atzilus to Briya, and that transition begins with the Malchus, the lower level, lowest level within the 10 spheres, within Atzilus rather, the lowest of all 10 spheres, which is Malchus, and only the Malchus becomes Malchus HaMalchus Kolomim. That's why it's called Shchinta, Shemishachenet or Mislabeshes. It invests in the inferior, starting from Elam Habriya, even though again Elam Habriya is a very spiritual world. The Gan Eden Ha'elyon is in Elam Habriya, as we spoke many times. But nonetheless, it's the haschala of Briya, the haschala of being something out of the total domain of the Ein Sof, because as we spoke, and Alter Rebbe speaks about it as well, the whole phenomenon of Gan Eden says it's not the purity of Elokus. What is Gan? What is Gan Eden? And what is Neshama sitting in Yaveh Miziv Ashchina? This cannot exist in the face of the true infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The fact that this whole phenomenon of exist, of a Gan Eden and Neshamis and Yeshvin and Nenin, again you can see it in the chapters, in different chapters in Likutei Amorim, says that it's again a step away from the way the Ein Sof is for himself by himself, and that's the haschala of Briya. But nonetheless, together with that is a very, Rabbi explains that that's why it's only Ziv HaShchina, the ray of the Shechina, because the entire Shechina no one could comprehend, certainly not have a no, not appreciate it, not understand, not have the pleasure of it, the delight of it, that doesn't exist in the face of the Ein Sof. So that transition is between Atzilus and Briya, which is the Malchus of Atzilus. So that is similar to the king coming out of his inner chamber, and coming out to say the statement. So when he's for himself by himself, no one knows about him or what he has in his mind and what he's going to say and how he's going to lead. It's only when he comes out of his chamber, of his palace, and he stands and he makes that statement. That's similar to the Malchus Datzilus coming outwards and creating or establishing this new idea of Bria Yitzir Asiyah. But Bria is naturally very close to that energy which is coming from Malchus Datzilus. And that's similar to those ministers who stand by the king when he's coming out initially in the first stage of his relating to the public. And when he comes out of his palace and he stands, those ministers, the appreciation and understandings of the ministers and those few words and those few seconds of the king's word, with the king's relating those words, the way they understand it is so different than the townspeople in the little shtetl to which this message which will ultimately reach. It's a total different appreciation of the words of the king. Similarly, the Nevi'im, they are the level in Eilam Abriya, bordering, so to say, Eilam Atzilus. We're not talking about physically, we're talking about where their neshama was. In the time when they appreciated and they received that nevuah, that prophecy. And they are standing there, kind of the minister which is standing so close to the king and hears the inner workings, the inner message of the king, as opposed to this energy which ultimately would create Eilam Hazeh. This is the way the energy has been camouflaged, if you will, time and again, eventually till it comes and becomes the source of creation, which is the Milan de Hedieta, creating a world of Hedieta, so to say, an inferior world, as we explain every part of Eilam Hazeh, or even that stone. In the end of the day, there is obviously no comparison. Now, when we concluded Perek Beis, I will just say that you can see in the end of these words, the terminologies, in the end of Perek Beis, Atzilus, Bria. We spoke about this in the past in length and in elaboration. In the previous chapters, Melamids of Likutei Amorim, in length. And for example, in the Perek Lamed Tes, as an example, we spoke about this really in expansiveness. Atzilus, Bria, the idea of the L'Shem Yichud Kudsha B'Richu Shchinte, or rather even more so in Perek Mem. So and we took a lot of time to explain this, so we're kind of noting this in brief, but nonetheless we can all appreciate the message the message and the reason why Hashem would use the same terminology, Vaydaber Hashem, Vayemen Hashem, when he demonstrates his inner workings, if it's to the Navi or deeper than that, to be something to become part of Teras Emes, to Hashem using the same terminology in the very beginning of creation when he creates, also using Vayemen Hashem. Nonetheless, again, we just naturally conclude in this vart. In the end of the day, Hashem wants us to fuse the two. But in the end, but when we speak about creation, back to the message of Perek Beis, that Hashem brings creation into being every single moment. It's not only Mechaye, but it's Mehave, just like the state before Hashem created the world. It was a state of total nothingness, simple nothingness. There wasn't anything, something which our minds cannot appreciate adequately. As we spoke in the past, we're part of this something, we're part of this Zman Mokim. We can't think about it, we can't appreciate what does it mean there was nothing, or there was no time. Time is a phenomenon which is was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and so took place. But we could understand one way or another, if the world came into being at a certain so many thousands of years ago, that tells us that it was a state of nothing, and then Hashem brought it to a state of being. So too, it's not only Atem Kulam, that same energy of the 22 letters of the Asar Mamoris brings everything presently into creation, from a state of Ayin to a state of Yesh, and not only generally, but every detailed part of creation is being recreated in the exact same fashion accordingly every single moment. Have a wonderful night.